Good afternoon, everyone. We're about to start this webinar of Viaggio Plus with the title Towards Sustainable City Logistics. We will start with a presentation from Yanyin Li from Ertico ITS Europe. If at any point you have any questions, please use the question pane. At the end of the webinar, you will have time to raise your hand and make any comments you may have. Enjoy.
During the presentation time, if you have questions, you can use the question. You can type your questions, but at the end we will you can raise your hand. We will unmute you, and then you are able to answer. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. My name is Yanyin Li. I'm the coordinator of Viaggio Plus. It's an international coordination project. I will give a short interview before I hand it to our experts in urban logistics. Viaggio Plus is an FP7 project aiming at knowledge exchanging and then best practice information sharing, and to promote more sustainable transport solutions, not only in Europe, but also with China, Latin America, and other countries worldwide. So the idea is to bring experts together and then to exchange information and knowledge. We cover China, we cover Singapore, we cover Latin America, and we also cover Mediterranean partner countries, and that is mainly South Mediterranean countries, to identify their needs, to identify good practices from all these regions, and then to facilitate technology uptakes, and then to strengthen European industry's competitiveness in the global market. Oh, that's short. I will hand. We run several seminars in different topics. We done vehicle automations. We done cooperative system. Today, the topic is urban logistics. All the informations are available at the project website, and if you need more information, feel free to contact me or Sylvia or anyone in Ertico. And so I hand the one first to Paulos from University of Newcastle, and he's expert in urban logistics.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paulos Adichandra. I'm working for Newcastle University at the NewRail Newcastle Centre for Railway Research, School of Mechanical and Systems Engineering, UK. This afternoon, I will talk about part of our research in urban logistics, titled Engaging City Stakeholders Towards Achieving Smart Urban Freight Solutions. And I will present a particular on British case study, which is basically the Newcastle case, which is part of either EU FP7 projects called Smart Fusion. I'll talk about you shortly. The outline of the presentation is I'll talk a bit about the background, why we actually came up to the state of the research now, and what we're trying to address, what's the research question, and how it helps the European urban freight research in general. And then we talk about the methodology that we use in this particular case, and then I also we're going to bring the case study of Newcastle, the situations, and how it's actually applied to the city of Newcastle, and then give some analysis, conclusions, and give some recent update with the study. So, background, right? I give you the framework first from the very top level, which is come from the white paper 2011. If many, I believe that many of you would be aware of the very ambitious vision of a future urban freight transport. This is actually somehow that we illustrate how it's actually applied into diagrams. If you see here is actually the dot hub is actually representing cities, well, or probably a freight village or something, which is actually connected by the transport systems across Europe. And the policy itself is actually saying Long distance for freight is actually over 300 kilometers. City logistics, which is actually all this hub, which included the port cities as well, which is actually connecting to the global world, has also its own agenda, which is being a CO2-free city logistics by 2030. So the clean urban freight policy for European cities, as we understand it now, is actually trying to minimize the number of freight movement and the distance required to carry them out, and then using low-emission vehicles or trucks and making the maximum use of ITS to increase the efficiency of delivery. And we try to address this through the project that we're going to introduce you shortly. So what's the issues with the urban freight systems? As we know that the a well-functioning urban goods distribution system, city authorities, well, again, city authorities, so it's not from the private. As we know, that city logistics traditionally is always a private sector-driven activities. But these days actually becomes an issue for city authorities to start looking at this. And then this is actually the area where public-private partnerships become a big issue, where I think not long ago, I think I've got with me a document, research policy called the European Green Cars Initiative by the EU, tried to promote public-private partnership, which basically try to engage between different stakeholders across the cities to make the vision of future urban freight transport work, and also in other sectors, of course. So the public-private partnerships, we identify from the previous research that private sectors lack knowledge of the initiatives and regulations put forward by the public sector to improve the sustainability of freight operations. And similarly, incompetence within city authorities for managing urban freight is also evident throughout European cities. So while there's actually many projects funded for city logistics in Europe, there's actually also many failures. So we try to bridge this by a new innovative concept called public-private partnership, which is engaging all these stakeholders. How are we going to do about it? And then we sit together and we want to address this. So the case of an engagement process, or well, maybe you can also say a consultation process within these stakeholders in cities. Well, it's not only in Newcastle actually. It's the Smart Fusion actually, the project that tries to address this. It's actually also looking at the other cities in Germany and also in Italy. Smart Fusion is a public-private partnership which built up an existing urban freight development strategies. So the idea is to introduce the concept of public-private partnership through a European Green Initiative in last-mile operations, to introduce innovative technology developments in the field of urban freight planning, vehicles, and inter-urban transshipment, and to develop comprehensive and transferable impact assessment model for smart urban freight solutions. So that's going to be applied into 3 cities, and this afternoon I'll talk only the case for Newcastle. The methodology, right? The entry point is actually the public-private partnership, and as you see the previous slide, there's actually identified numbers of key stakeholders. And then now the issue is actually how are we going to make these different stakeholders have a meaningful engagement that can actually make something happen between them. So in Smart Fusion, we actually introduced what is it called the logical framework approach. Well, although that the applications is actually we make use of adapted the logical framework approach through a design and monitoring framework. The logical framework approach, or LFA, it has an origin from 1969 when the U.S. Agency for International Development needed an evaluation framework for projects, and since then it becomes the 8th industry standard tool for project management of development organizations. So we adopt this approach to design a project that is agreed between different stakeholders and try to understand all the stakeholder needs, and then we hope that it's actually going to bring to something that we expected to see, which is actually a deployment of a technology or policy initiatives and innovations. On the left side of the slide here, you will see is actually part of the design monitoring framework, which is actually a kind of a LFA designed by the Asian Development Bank, which has all the criteria that we need to fill. So in the end, it actually becomes part of the a framework. So a framework is a framework. And then how this works, the key to the DMF, okay, so now we jump from the LFA to the DMF, design monitoring framework, is its participatory approach. So all the stakeholders actually has the opportunity to say what their will, their interests, and their aim or objective to their organizations, and then bring it to this opportunity, bring it to one media. And then we built this, what is it called, problem tree, that we're going to get through a step-by-step, first by stakeholder analysis, which is basically identifying the stakeholder interest, their perception problems, and their available resources to address them, as well as their mandate. Mandate is basically a term used in the DMF to represent authority and power to indicate, to initiate or to change actions. And then we, after we identify the stakeholder, and then we start identifying the problems, which is actually start to develop a tree, as you can see on this side here, which is actually related to the change of cause and effect that lead to a problem tree development. And then the next step is actually objective analysis, which is actually looking at on another way how the problem can be overcome. And then through this objective analysis, we also have this alternative analysis, which is actually part of the objective analysis. And then we have the designs. The design itself is actually will come into a matrix that can be used for all the stakeholders involved in the project. So we introduced that to the stakeholders in Smart Fusion projects and through 3 cities. But we're also aware, as we actually the one who actually conduct this research, we realize there are some limitations with this approach, especially the application to the urban freight studies is just like the first one, really. So we haven't seen anything like it before. And then we're always watching, there's actually a strength where this approach is actually a good test bed, because it's a project management tool. It can become a key performance indicator basis. It can also help to identify indicators for monitoring progress. And it can also become a flexible tool, because as we see, the stakeholders can actually also change their objective and aims through time as well. And there's also some weakness that we identified there, including static, less sensitive to multiple socio-economic and political issues, and then it's also quite focus specific. So how this applies to Newcastle? And well, first, it's actually generally Newcastle is a medium-sized complexity history, so it's actually much more representing of a typical British cities. Well, of course, I think we're aware of a very good impact of a London case as a British city, the city in Britain, which has a very extensive freight planning. But for medium-sized cities, there's actually a bit less information that we have, and we try to bring Newcastle so it actually gives some flavor and of what we learn, really, and then hopefully this can be transferable to another medium-sized cities. As you see here, the trend is actually the LGV is going up, so there's issue. Well, it used to be not a problem for Newcastle having the traffic, and even up to now I can actually tell in Newcastle it's not really that congested in terms of traffic, but it's getting more and more vehicles, and then, well, with the help of the system as well, we can actually see that the city is getting more economic activities. So the city of Newcastle itself is actually only in here, and then is actually where the urban logistics research that we try to address. There's actually 3 freight policies in Newcastle that we're aware of. It's actually first is the promotions of a freight quality partnership. Second is the Tananware Consolidation Center. It's at that time it's actually called the Hub. And then the low emission zone. Of course, this is actually still aspirational. So it's nothing really compulsory, but it's actually been mentioned in the local transport plan. And so since we have a freight quality partnership, which is basically a media or a forum for all the freight stakeholders in the city and region interested to address or to raise any issues with regards to city logistics come to place, we actually use this network to introduce our approach of a GMF. As you can see on the pictures here, it's actually demonstrating a process that we actually start introducing with, using cards to build the problem trees with the name, interest, problem, resources, and mandates, and then grouping in the tables, and then completing the cards. So we're actually also showing the to all stakeholders involved to build what they think we're going to address the sustainable city logistics in Newcastle. And then you see this is actually also a longitudinal process of consultations, as there's a series of workshops involved. Of course, with the changeable stakeholders, where we can actually also tell that the stakeholders which has the highest interest, of course, attended all of this process, but some of them actually drop off because of their lack of interest, and also because of their other commitments or anything like that. And we identify in Newcastle case that there's actually one stakeholder which is big, which is receivers in terms of city logistics, which including the Newcastle University, Northumbria University, which is 2 big universities in Newcastle City, Gateshead College, and then Eldon Square and Metro Centre Management, which is actually one of the biggest retail in the city of Newcastle. And Metro Centre is actually representing the region. I think it's in Gateshead. There's also carriers and logistic operators, which is included Clipper Logistics, which is part of the partner of a Smart Fusion project, and the Hub, which is actually another consolidation center companies. It's actually promoted by the City Council. Local authority, of course, involved, and then technology provider, which is actually supported by the Smart Fusion partners through Volvo, Smith Electrics, Vehicles, and PTV, and then others. We also invited the freight transport associations and local council private partners, such as consultants. In this case, is ACOM there. And of course, we need the facilitator, which is us. So we actually have the luxury to have to look at this process through time. Through this process, and then, well, I actually start seeing the time now because I really don't want to just keep talking so long. Just give to some of the analysis. After we identify the stakeholders, we start collecting all these remarks from the stakeholders, and we can actually start defining the problem tree. So with the problem tree, you see we can actually point it to what causes actually all the stakeholders believe. And first, actually, I just have to mention again with the DMF process, with this logical framework approach, we try to rephrase the concept itself. Instead of looking at address a problem, which is what many stakeholders in cities try to address, is how are we going to address the environmental pollution. No, we don't start with that. We actually start with the negative questions, unsustainable freight transport in the university campus. Sorry, it actually becomes a university campus here is because I forgot to mention that in the process of a consultations, it actually becomes clear that the highest interest for getting city logistics innovation or city logistic intervention is actually the university. And the University of Newcastle is actually one of the biggest employer in the Northeast. In fact, it's actually the second largest employer in the region. Well, the first one is the hospital, which also show interest to this process. But the hospital is actually apparently part of the university as well, the half and half words. So we can actually say that the university is one of the largest employer in the region. So they really think that they're going to be something to be done about the city logistics. Well, I'm not going to get through this individually, but in the end, we've actually reversed that problem 3 into an objective 3. So we actually start addressing, okay, from the unsustainable freight cities, is actually we start with the coherent freight activity. So how are we going to address that? And then each of them is actually come into an objective that each stakeholders can address or play their role in these activities. And then with this objective 3, as you see, this is actually quite an interactive process that you can read through at your leisure time. We can actually also develop the MF matrix that we distribute this across the stakeholders. Or, yeah, we distribute, but we also consult with each of the stakeholders involved. So in the end, we actually come with the 3 outputs there, which is a coordinated freight deliveries, correctly parked freight vehicles, and clean vehicles. And from there, we actually also identify the what actions actually that can realistically be implemented, which is including these activities here, which is actually not come from us, but it's actually come from the stakeholders, which is in this case is actually the university function of procurement department and the estate service. And yeah, I think this is actually just a bit of an explanation of each of those. And well, this is actually finished. I think I should really tell a bit of a story about the consolidation center, which is meant to be for the city of Newcastle. That's actually not become realized. The only reason for that was because the hub, which is actually the consolidation center being promoted by Newcastle, by Newcastle City Council, is well, I can definitely say that it's actually a failure. And then the failure for that is actually because of 4 aspects, which is first is the extra cost for receiver or retailer, so no one actually wants to use it. And there's actually the fact that there's an existing or abundant storage for capacity in the main retail center in Newcastle City, which in this case is Howden Square. So they have a very big underground storage for goods that no retailers actually want to use the extra consolidation center outside of the city. And then there is also private consolidation centers run by big retailers, for example, like John Lewis, Mark and Spencer, or other Fennec. They have their own consolidation center. So in that case, there's really no market really for the consolidation center, which is promoted by City Council. And last but not least, is actually about the location of the hub itself, really, which is located a bit west part of the city, so it's actually a bit less accessible. While City Newcastle is actually located at the north of England, most of the delivery or distributions come from the south. And then there's actually a big hub just before entering the city from the south part of the city of Newcastle, which becomes the main center for many distribution centers before entering the city of Newcastle. So Newcastle City Council actually adopted another consolidation center, or promoting a consolidation center, which is located at the west part of the city. So it's not really somehow realistic, because every distribution of freight from south will stop at the south before go to the west. Maybe I should really bring a map with it to show this, but anyway, that's actually one of the issue with the city of Newcastle. This is the interventions of the consolidation center with the Newcastle University, and then also the capturing initiatives. So through this process with the engagement activities through stakeholders, we concluded a few conclusions. First is with this approach, we can draw knowledge and creativity of the stakeholders, and then we open to every stakeholders involved and interest, and then noted down and also created even a matrix and framework for them to work forward. And then we identify consensus of addressing the same issue of agenda, and so we identify the problems, and we also highlighted the commitment needed for each of the steps on the process. And we also want to draw about the important aspect of a neutral facilitator, that in this case is us. We also identify the motivation of the stakeholders to address an urgent issue, which is actually very, very topical and important. And of course, because we have a mandate, so there's actually some resources to support this happens. And then we can also highlight that this approach is somehow taken by the stakeholders as a non-traditional planning process. As you see that the consultation process, according to the City Council, it actually can take up to 9 months. With this case of DMF process, we actually just take like, well, it can actually be done in a few weeks, but if everyone can really bear their times, but because of the time limitation for a number of key stakeholders, we have to do it within the range of 3 or 4 months through a number of face-to-face meetings and workshops. And also we identify that the support of other research activities surrounded this area of urban freight research in Newcastle, where the desk-based and empirical research such as traffic counts and interviews, staff questionnaires, etc., is actually supporting these activities, becoming like giving more evidence or convincing the stakeholders that this is actually a serious case, and then we actually even bring more evidence that, well, if a city wants to be more sustainable, we have to address this, because the data is actually showing the trends is going towards something that we have to do something rather than not do something. So, right. So how has it gone then? The engagement process finished now, and then the university adopting a consolidation center, which is not the one that's been promoted by the City Council, but it's actually the one that's been initiated by the university, and also through the Smart Fusion and Partnership Framework. Well, in this case, it's Clipper Logistics, part of the partner of Smart Fusion, and it's been in a pilot for 9 months. It's been successful. There's actually a growing number of goods actually being consolidated, and it's actually also touched some area of the procurement activities, and then there's some facts from our other research. And we'd like to highlight one thing about this, is that while this case of consolidating deliveries is not new to the freight industry, for a university business environment, it is rather innovative idea. And we can actually tell you proof of it, that we received 2 awards recently from the university management for environmental innovation. So yeah, this is actually now start spread, you know, from the private to the public. Well, if you say that university is part of the public sector. We also won the prestigious UK Higher Education Award for its performance in improving the environment through what they call it a Smart Fusion initiative. So it's actually well accepted really in the academic industry. This is actually a bit of a data where we actually consolidated around the university side. Well, I think I missed a bit of information that University of Newcastle is actually quite big employer. It has 5,000 staff with 20,000 students. So from about 200 delivery spots, we actually now just use the number of spots here, which is 9, to drop the last mile delivery with the electric vehicles that's recently been bought by the university. And we also use the service by Clipper Logistics as the logistic provider to do track and trace. So there's some references if you're actually interested to know more. Well, because it's doing research, so there's actually also some stuff that we're still writing to be accepted at the academic audience. But at the moment, there's actually a few that we can show you up here. If you're interested, please get in touch. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Paulus. For this very interesting presentation, we will continue with Tomás de Castro and Mar Escala from the Municipality of Barcelona.
Hello, we are going to explain how do we manage from the municipality point of view. We're going to start explaining which are to 2018. Then we are going to give some figures about freight transport in Barcelona and explain which are our ongoing solutions, the solutions that we already use. And finally, we'll explain some projects we are developing and some ideas for achieving the urban mobility plan goals. Let's start with this first part. The SAMP is medium and short-term actions, and it is coordinated with the metropolitan region and the metropolitan area mobility plans. And finally, after quite a long process, it was approved. Well, we always like to start our explanations about the mobility plan with this picture. We have a current situation that without any, and the tool that we have for planning this intervention is the SAMP. As you can see, we want a safe mobility, a sustainable mobility, facilitating modal shift, reducing in order to achieve those goals. In the case of Barcelona, we need to do many things. First of all, 30% the deaths in traffic incidents. We need to reduce the air pollution because we don't comply the annual average limit value in half of the stations inside the city. And we are already implementing a whole new bus network with which we will increment the average frequency from 12 minutes to 6 minutes. And finally, for the efficient mobility, we are planning, besides that bus network, besides the bicycle infrastructure, some new approaches to deal with urban freight distribution that include optimizing the use of public space. So we want the measures provided in the plan to have an effect on the modal split and increasing, because doing so that will allow us to achieve a reduction of 21% the use of private vehicles. But we can only do that by decreasing more than 350,000 trip stages made. So right now, this is the picture of the basic road network in the city. As you can see, not all the streets have the same importance, and that is what we think that gives us a clue of which would be the future city model. As you can see, the external ring would be black roads are the main entrances and exits of the city, and then finally the blue and the red roads are the most important internal streets. As not all the streets are necessary for this mobility function, we think now the city is mature enough for a new model in which not only some of the streets this street you can in all internal roads of those block of blocks, pedestrians will have priority. So once applied this model, this situation, which there are many block of blocks which are bigger, and we are aiming to reduce the traffic to only those. So besides this new organization of the city in super blocks, there are another 7 lines of actions in our urban mobility plan, and the last of them is directly related with the freight transport. In fact, the urban delivery is placed in 4th place in our modal hierarchy defined by the SAMP. The more sustainable modes of transport, pedestrians, bicycles, and public transport vehicles, we have the urban distribution. And we want to use this modal hierarchy as a guideline for defining the redistribution. In our case, with a capacity of more than 15,000 inhabitants per square kilometers, public space is a really limited thing. Now we're going to give some data about freight transport in Barcelona, just to give you some context. Every day are done more than 7.5 million trip stages, 5 million of which are internal trips, and more than 2.5 million are connection trips, of which near 450,000 trip stages are related with freight transport. So you can see in these charts, last year stopped the progressive decrease of trips related mainly to the economical crisis. A fleet of more than 64,000 freight transport vehicles. So you can see in the chart, the trend is a progressive decrease of the number of vehicles. I think that the increasing in the last 2 years is really significant, because a couple of years ago we changed the way the vehicles are classified. So for us it would be more accurate to say that the decrease has stopped, but we are not still improving increasing the name of vans and trucks. In fact, last 2 years we have detected a turnaround in the evolution of new van and truck registrations that increased by 30% in 2014. 2011, but we are still quite far from the numbers of 2006 and 2007 without the economical crisis. So on street, right now we have more than 10,000 parking. We have removed 88 of them, and as you can see, back in 2008, we had more than 3,000. We could do this reduction in the number of some use of public space. red chart there, which is
okay. Barcelona. It's classified in two blocks. The first block is the infrastructure measures. There are use lanes.
Sorry to interrupt. It seems we are having some issues with the sound of the speakers back in Barcelona. I suggest we leave it here. We will put all the presentations online, and maybe we go directly to the round of questions and answers. So if you have any comments, please raise your hand. There is a question from Sarah Ranang. Hello, Sarah, are you there? We also have a question from Robert Stussy. Hello, Robert. You can speak
Hello.
now? Hello.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everybody. Well, the Barcelona presentation just starts to get really interesting at this point. You think we couldn't continue with it because, I mean, more or less we can understand what they say, or you think really it's not possible? Because,
some of you have said that it's really difficult to follow up, but if majority thinks it's better to continue and you are able to understand, we are really happy to give back the floor to Marescala. Shall we?
I think at least half of it we understand, and with the pictures I think it would work. I mean, that's my opinion, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the first block, the infrastructure measures, and the first object on street loading and unloading areas. We have on the street a wide range of parking space reserved where carriers can stop to make the loading operations. These areas are signalized like you can see in the picture, and have a limitation of 30 minutes for each operation. That sometimes it's not enough. That's what happened in the most streets, but what happened in the pedestrian zones? We have some problems in that kind of configurations, especially in the city center. There are narrow streets and the pressure over public space due to tourism and commercial areas makes difficult the cohabitation between vehicles and pedestrians. So the circulation of vans and trucks are difficult, and it generates a constant maintenance of the pavement, like you can see in that pictures. So for that pedestrian zones, we have a solution of time windows. What it means that vans and trucks can to 11 a.m. and from is very useful. So we have seen an evolution for this access control, from providing cars for neighbors combined with use of bikes, or even just changing infrastructure measure is the multi-use demand over the fixed offer. So the space on the street is what we have. Public space and how it works. In peak hours, the lane can be used for traffic, for bus and taxi. And during the day, but out of the rush hours, loading and unloading operations are allowed. And then at night, we use it as a parking line. And how we signalize these lines? We use two options. On lights on the pavement using the technology.
is that you can see in that picture is the same street, and you can see how the signal is changing depending on time. And then is the static signals that and the second block, we have the management measures. Those measures try to maximize the number of operations out of rush hours and off the street. In general, loading operations we want to study case per case, because the businesses that wanted to make it must ensure that there will be no one big supermarket that makes because there are example, there is less congestion during the day because we reduce operations can use larger trucks, reducing the number of trips. For example, unloading can be done in front of their destination, and the cost due to the wages of workers and the new silent equipment is balanced by the increased productivity. And finally, the last measure are the building regulations. The public market reserves some for the businesses in the surroundings. And for private buildings, every commercial building with more than 400 square meters has to arrange an off-street delivery area, like you can see in that picture. And for total surface. So those are the solutions we have taken up to now, and Tomás will continue with the explanation with the new measures we want to try and promote in our mobility plan.
Thank you. So, for new solutions, well, the SAM, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, defines 9 actions in order to further improve the efficiency and to optimize the use of. First type is about improving the information available. Then we have some management measures, and finally, we are introducing some new technologies for managing the on-street parking. Well, as we are facing a very complex context with different types of goods delivered, different vehicles, and different use the most reliable and up-to-date information possible. We know we need a scientific approach, a rigorous approach to the urban distribution of goods. Right now, we know we have a lack of data of how the freight transport works, and if we want to treat the urban distribution with accuracy, we must collect data and analyze it. And we know that as a public administration, transport and in public, we need data about the freight vehicles. How many trips are done? Do the vehicles use our on-street areas? Do they have a depot? Are they circulating full? Where they come from? How do they do their deliveries? If they are fast, how many times do they stay in each destination? But we also need to know how the businesses work, not only the vehicles, because it's not the same for transport for supermarkets, restaurants, for the e-commerce, for post services, shopping centers, department stores. So we know, and we know our lack of data, and we are doing some freight transport oriented surveys. Districts and neighborhoods. That's very important for us because of the urban form. The urban form of Barcelona, with its capacity and the characteristics of the streets that are very different from one district to another. Here you can see the old town, then the Eixample district, and then another less compact kind of city that we have near the hill of Tibidabo. Well, and once we have all that information, what do we have to do? We have to combine it with the desired city model. There are some traditional solutions that we use right now that we need to change because we want to limit the access of the vehicle to some parts of the city. And as you can see in the pictures, if we want to limit access to the internal areas of the superblocks, we are still investigating where do we have to place the new on-street delivery areas. But with all the information that we have collected and considering that new city model, how can we update the current solutions? Well, the first thing that we realize is we have to assign different solutions depending on the context. As we are facing different vehicles and different needs, we know we are not going to solve the whole problem with just one solution, and to choose what operational function is the most. So, in the case of developing that will only be allowed in certain time slots. Where access is forbidden for all the private vehicles, and loading operations can only be done during 2 hours in the morning and another 2 hours in the afternoon. In this case, as Mark told you before, we've used a smart system with cameras that recognize the license plates of the vehicles because we are trying to avoid the installation of bollards in our last projects for access control. And we're trying to find some that we are trying to implement blocks strategy. Or municipality has also tested in the old town a new urban consolidation center using electric tricycles as a part of an European project called SMILE. In the old town, the fact that the streets are very narrow and nearly all are a single platform streets with the great compactness of the buildings cannot continue with a distribution model based on large motor vehicles. So we tested an alternative system for post and for e-commerce companies where the parcels are light and small. The center that you can see its actual location is used as a kind of transshipment point where vans arrive and then the cargo bikes do the last mile deliveries. That way we are reducing the number of vans entering the streets of Ciutat Vella. As loading and unloading for vans and trucks is only allowed 3 hours in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, and taking into account that we want to even reduce that time windows to 2 hours in the morning, cargo bikes have an advantage because they don't have this restriction, so they can deliver the goods at any time during the day. In this pilot, we tested two types of services from the transshipment point. What we call the shared box service, where parcel of different shippers share the same box. Well, right now the center that was opened last year as a pilot is still working, and we have some encouraging results with regards to their environmental impact. So in the future, we are planning a next step that consists in the consolidation of the system for the whole old town, as you can see here, where the restrictions to vehicles access makes us easier to introduce this kind of solution. And before next year, we're going to reallocate the distribution center in an existing building next to Estació de França, which is the train station placed next to the old town. That way, we are going to solve some problems with the temporary location in the middle of Passeig Lluís Companys, which was not the ideal situation. Then after that first step, we have a plan for implementing a whole network of urban consolidation centers for deliveries with not only cargo bikes but also small electric vehicles. Because outside the city center, the historical city center, the urban model of superblocks, with its reduction of space for motorized vehicles, should help us to extend the use of bicycles for locations where we can replicate the old town center adapted to the specific reality of each district. With the large retail sector, we know that we cannot use the same model, that the micro-platform consolidation centers is not suitable for them. So in this case, we're trying to speak with all the operators and studying every single case and trying to apply one of the solutions we have tested before, like the night deliveries, the multi-purpose lanes, or even the specific time windows for vans and trucks. Then we're going for the last measure in the sum, which is the incorporation of new technologies to improve the management of the loading areas. We have created this year a new application for smartphones with which we try to substitute the traditional cargo disc with the clock, and now and register the vehicles and their activity, and then they can park in on-street loading and unloading zones using the app. This will help us to improve the data we have of the time used by different operators, and will allow us to define in the future some more precise time regulations. Here you can see that nearly all the city is using already this application. Here you can see how it works. You open it, then you see a map, you choose the point where you want to park your van, and then the time starts counting, and when you leave the system, the GPS of the mobile phone detects that you have already gone to another place and stop. Well, that's system right now is not compulsory, but it will be next week for all the loading and unloading areas. And for next year, we're planning to provide them with a map with a number of free loading and unloading parking slots in every area. Here you can see some figures of the tests we've done with that we have reached the 20% of the operation with the application. So here you can see that before the app, we used for deliveries the paper disk, and the precision of the system had led us to use the delivery areas nearly as van parkings. Now with this new application, we will have 300 people that now control also the regulated car parking areas to control the delivery areas. That is for us a key measure in optimizing the space we have, because increasing control, we know that increasing control can duplicate the space available. And finally, we are testing some solutions based on infrastructure, on vehicle detectors in some Superblocks pilots in order to evaluate the benefits of another kind of solution for managing the public space. Well,
thank you, Tomás, for this very interesting presentation. So now we go for we are a bit over time, but I think we have at least 5 minutes to hear your comments and questions. There are some questions asked on the question pane.
Yeah, there's one question asked. There's between 1997 to 2007, there's a decreased number in HGVs, but increased number in the vans. So how did you see why is such change, and did you see that's also happen in the future? You get reduced the number of HGVs, but the deliver vans may increase.
Yes, I am. Well, the fact is that okay, thank you. The number of vans hasn't increased. The number that has increased is the annual registrations. We came from a time that there were much more registrations every year, and that number decreased in a quite dramatic way in the last years because of the economic crisis. And now all the operators are renewing their vehicles, but we don't have more than before. We still have less, but the number is stable right now. And we would like to have even less. The decreasing trend has stopped, but we're starting to have a rise in the number of vans. So we don't know really.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other question or comments? I see some hands. One hand from Graham Ellis. Hello, Graham.
Yes, hello. I was just wondering if there was any data on the amount of CO2 that had been saved by using the electric bikes in Barcelona.
So, Tomás, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Well, we have some data about which reduction of CO2 we have achieved with the electric tricycles, but we do not have a plan for the introduction of those vehicles, because what we are trying to do now is to introduce a new system. We know that it has some benefits, but we are trying to involve all the stakeholders, not just us as a municipality, for doing so. So it's not a question which we are strictly planning, because besides we don't have the authority for make that kind of eco-labeling. So we are just encouraging people to use our is quite modest, and we are just trying to have a small fleet of cargo bikes in every part of the city, and then we will see.
Thank you, Tomás. We have another question from Andrea Rosa. The question is, how are delivery companies within the coal supply chain taking the idea of only using the loading, unloading bays and not parking in front of destinations?
They are not happy, but they must accept that the public space is for everyone, and that they are not our first priority. They have to adapt their timetables to the time windows we give them. And well, regarding the use of those transshipment points, they are quite happy because they can deliver shared cargo bike, deliver the parcels for them in a part of the city with where they used to lose a lot of time. So we are still trying to convince them to use a similar system on their own, but well, we're trying to solve the problem when they appear. So right now we don't have many complaints because we are introducing those systems in only some areas, but we will see in the future when we try to eliminate the loading areas in front of the businesses.
Thank you, Tomás. We have a last comment from Ana Herrera Alcubilla. Hello, Ana. Are you there, Ana? Ana Herrera Alcubilla?
Then there's one more question.
Well, in that case, we have another question from Laila Abdelai, who would like to have more details about the business model of the UDC.
Okay. Well, right now we did a pilot which the municipality paid for the tricycles, and then we just asked one company to do all the operations, and all the benefits were for them. But now we are changing the model. The municipality will pay for the building in which there are the installations, and the operator will do their operations for their own benefit, with the municipality just paying for the building. So it should be municipality, but we are still trying to see how the shared cargo bike can be subsidized with advertising in the vehicles, because we are facing some troubles with the Heritage department of the city, because they don't want us to have advertising in the vehicles. But we are trying to find a solution without any cost, or with the minimum cost for the municipality, to give a service to all the citizens. So we still don't know if that system will work outside the historical city center, but we will try to implement the same system, maybe just paying for the electric vehicles in a first step outside the ongoing task. We are still developing, we are still changing the way we manage the urban consolidation center, so we will see. We are still experimenting.
Thank you very much to all the panelists, to Paulo Adichandra, to Tomás de Castro, and to Maria Scala for accepting to give these very interesting presentations. Apologies to all the attendees for the audio problems we have had. All the presentations and also the video of this webinar will be available on the Viaggio Plus website, and we hope to see you all again in the next webinar on EU-China cooperation. The date is still to be decided, but the information will be very soon online. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.